Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home. Welcome everybody to the Heal Your Hunger Show. So happy to have you here. It is a great day to be alive, and I am super excited, beyond excited, to interview my next guest. She's absolutely amazing, and I really consider to be responsible for my even being here in some indirect way because of her incredible work around emotional eating, compulsive eating, and healing the underlying causes of people's food and weight struggles. So before I rave about her, I'm just going to say hi, Geneen. I'm glad to have you here, Geneen Roth.
Hi, Tricia. Really good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for those who might not, I can't imagine anybody listening to my show who wouldn't know of Geneen Roth, but in case you don't, for over 30 years, Geneen has worked with hundreds of thousands of people, helping them transform difficult relationships with food and so much more. She's one of the originators of the intuitive eating movement and using food and eating as a doorway to spirituality. Her pioneering approach outlines a link between compulsive eating and perpetual dieting with deeply personal and spiritual issues such as forgiveness and trust in the unseen that go far beyond food, weight, and body image, which is right up my alley. And her most recent book is called This Messy, Magnificent Life. She's really incredible. She has, you might know her by her New York Times bestseller, Women, Food, and God, and many other books. So she's appeared on Super Soul Sunday, The Oprah Show, everywhere, basically everywhere. And Geneen, I just want to say welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tricia.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. Like I just remember being aware of your work, many moons ago when I was struggling. I was 50 pounds overweight and struggled miserably with my weight as an emotional eater. And, I was very aware of your books and have them on my shelf. And I just really appreciated just your pioneering work around this and really bringing people into the deeper conversation of what's really going on. And I struggled and did all the, I think, and everybody's journey, we start with the physical. Let's fix this with a diet. Let's fix this with something physical. And then if somebody struggles chronically, obviously, hopefully they'll take a deeper journey. And you've done such a marvelous job of helping people take that deeper journey into what the food represents and why it is that we're driven to self-destruct with food. So just thank you for your work.
This is my heart. Yes.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful. So, and congratulations on your most recent book, which is marvelous. I've really enjoyed reading it, and really just my God, I mean, if I wasn't in love with your topic, I would still be in love with your books because you're such an amazing writer. And it's really, I love how I laugh out loud when I'm reading your work.
Good.
Yeah,
That's
it's really.
Right. Wrapped their heels. So that's
absolutely. So it's just great. And, can you talk, what I love, and one of your books that I love and is something that I talk a lot about, which is the spiritual journey, which is so integral to one's healing journey. But of course, the Women, Food, and God book, just such a huge hit. Can you talk to me about your journey as an author and whether your books have taken, have the journey of your books, the evolution of your books from when you started to where you are now, have they taken their own journey that's reflected your journey?
Well, yes and no. Writing is a synchronistic process in that I often write something I want to explore. I usually start with a question and write my way into one of the answers. There are, of course, many, many answers to every question. And so writing for me is so personal because it's a way that I get to explore all aspects of a situation that I wasn't necessarily aware of or thinking about before I started writing. And that builds on my own personal inquiry or exploration of that topic. So it builds on itself. It's just
Okay.
a circular process there.
And
Yeah.
did you find that I mean, writing is, I'm sure you recommend it to people, but writing is such a healing process. Did you find that the books that you've written have healed parts of you?
A couple of things I want to say about writing. It's really hard. Writing is hard as a writer and as a writer of books. It's like life. Sometimes it flies and sometimes it just slugs, and about persistence and endurance and commitment and steadfastness, just keeping at it.
Yeah.
And that's how it is. I also feel like that's how it is in working with one's emotional eating or working with any aspect of oneself. Actually, there are slog days and there are flying days, and that's how it is working with eating.
Yeah.
You've just broken free, and then suddenly a situation happens and you're back to where you think you started from, and you feel like, oh my God, nothing has changed at all. And so what was the question you asked me?
Well, what we're getting to is it's a very personal journey, like whatever journey, whether it's the writing journey or the eating journey, it is a very personal journey, and it's not a a straight shot to success.
I'd say there are aspects of it that are, of course, personal to each person, but there are aspects that are universal in terms of what I see in my retreat students, because I've been teaching retreats now for 20 years. And at every retreat, there are new people that come, and at every retreat, there's a core of about 50 or 60 people that come each time, that I've been working with now, for some of whom for 2 years, some of whom for 15 years. And I see certain themes, and some of the themes I see are universal themes. This feeling of, I want to get this over with, I want to get rid of it. If I could just cut compulsive eating out of me, then I would be totally fine. It's the only thing that's wrong. It's the reason I'm suffering. And if I could just get rid of it, then I'd be healed. And that's never true, ever.
Right.
It's anything that we do comes from a deeper part of us, is an expression of something else. And so let's just say you could get rid of. I used to want to just, when I was in quite a self-destructive phase with food, and I was 80 pounds more than I weigh now, I wanted to just slash my thighs and my arms and pieces of my face. And I was completely convinced that if I could be thin, everything would be fine. And that's not what happens, because it was always an expression of how I felt about myself, the amount of self-loathing or self-recrimination or self-judgment I had about myself, which, if it wasn't about food in my body, it was about something else.
Exactly. Is that what your answer to people when they're like, can I just get over it already?
Well, I can't tell you how many people have come to see me over the years, and said, well, okay, this sounds pretty good. I like the idea of intuitive eating, but, let me go on a diet first, lose all the weight I need to lose, and then come back to this. And then I see people 10, 20, 30 years later and they have gained 10, 20, 30 more pounds. Because
Right.
there's no getting rid of something. It's a part of yourself. And when you say you want to get rid of it, you're basically saying, I'm at war with a part of myself. And I want to get rid of a part of myself. And war doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And it certainly doesn't work when we are trying to go to war, and even though people don't see it like that, with a part of ourselves, because it's a part of ourselves.
Right.
It just doesn't help to be abusive or violent with ourselves, and wanting to get rid of something is really some kind of self-abuse. That's a very strong word, and I wouldn't necessarily, I'm just called it that right now, but I wouldn't necessarily call it that all the time. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. No, it's being at odds with oneself is probably the last way to get where you want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about the crazy aunt in the attic? Because I love that. I just think it's beautiful.
So that's what I called it in This Messy, Magnificent Life. And in Women, Food, and God, I called it the GPS from the Twilight Zone. That is a voice that every single one of us has. We developed it by the time we were 4 years old. It's a developmental necessity. It's the voice that our parents instilled in us, our culture instilled in us, tells us not to throw food on the wall, not to go around biting people, not to run out in the middle of traffic. We have to be enculturated, so to speak. And so we learn how to have manners and how to basically act in a way that is not acting out with people that we know and want to be with. However, what happens as we get older is that that voice takes over, and that voice censors our creative impulses. That voice censors anything original or authentic because it wants to keep the status quo, which means that anytime you veer off into some kind of change, it says people might not like it, you might threaten people, this won't work. In fact, almost every new idea has been in the culture, basically, has been greeted with skepticism. I was reading recently about the man who discovered that vitamin C, i.e. eating lemons and oranges, could cure scurvy, and that was completely ridiculed until it wasn't. But it takes the culture a while to get used to new ideas, just like it takes us in the GPS from the Twilight Zone or the crazy aunt from the attic to hear that we want to eat in a particular way that's different than the way we've been taught, or we want to say something directly to somebody, and that crazy aunt in the attic comes in and says, don't squash. What happens after a while, and I found this with myself, is that it becomes this judgmental force, and we believe it. So it's the force that says your thighs are too big. Shame, shame, shame. I can't believe you wore that today. That's awful. I can't believe you said that today, or to that person. That's terrible. It's a constant presence in our life pushing us down, and it's painful. And the way we can tell it's operating is that we collapse. We suddenly feel small. We were feeling okay, but suddenly now we feel 2 inches, or we feel like there's a sinking in our chest and then in our stomach. It's a physical sensation. We were feeling great about ourselves and suddenly we're not. And that's how we know it has just stepped in.
Absolutely. And I think everybody listening knows that all too well. I know I do. I went down that hole literally a couple days ago where all of a sudden, I was doing fine. And all of a sudden my head was, attacking me with all kinds of negative thoughts of unworthiness and negativity. And, what I do typically is I pull out I have like a Word doc on my computer where I dump all the stuff I need to dump. And that every crazy, awful, self-hating thought went on that piece of paper, if you will, that document. And I find that to be so helpful, is just getting it out and getting some distance from it. So, and then realizing the absurdity of so many things I'm thinking, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how do you,
that voice, you can never do it right.
Right.
You do it one side, you shouldn't have eaten that. And it comes in, how could you, how dare you, who do you think you are? It talks like that.
Yep. It's mean. It's mean.
Very mean. But it also functions in comparative judgment. So if you're not where you think you should be, you could have a spiritual self-ego, for instance, and you could be thinking or saying to yourself, that's not spiritual. I can't believe I did that, or that's not what I thought I was going to be doing. The thing is that what it does is it beats you up, and then you're coming from fear and from judgment. And when you do that, it never leads to change of any kind.
Yeah, because it's contractive. It's not expansive.
No.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Gosh. And so when you're under attack, what's your best way of dealing with that?
Well, I think what you said is a great way of dealing with that. You can write it down. What I sometimes do is I write it down in the you. So you shouldn't have done that. How dare you? So that I realize that voice is not my friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me. Many of us are merged with it, and we're afraid that if we don't listen to it, we're going to gain 1 million pounds. We're going to act out. We're never going to have a brilliant idea. We're never going to create anything. We're going to eat horrible things. We think that's the voice that's keeping us in line. And if we don't listen to it, all hell will break loose. But it's very important to see that, and you can see this by writing it down in the you. It's an insane voice. It's mad, completely mad. And so we really look and separate it. That's the first thing. Disengage from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I want to talk to you about the rigidity. You know, it's so hard when you have an eating disorder and you try different things to control your eating and all this. And there is a whole spectrum. You've got the anorexic and the bulimic and the overeater and everything in between. But there is, times when people with disordered eating get into very rigid thinking, obviously around food, but around life as well, like you said, because they're afraid that one misstep and they're going to go down the rabbit hole. Can you talk into that a little bit?
So which part of that?
Well, I think, I find a lot of your work to be about self-compassion, coming to a place of self-acceptance and self-advocacy. And I find the rigidity, that we get into sometimes is fear, like you were talking about, is fear, but it's also counterproductive, obviously. So I guess I'm talking about having more compassion for oneself and it's important to know what works for you and what doesn't work for you food-wise and life-wise. But just having more compassion around ourselves to where we aren't living by very rigid lines.
Yeah, so I think you can ask yourself very many times a day, what's the kindest thing I could do for myself right now?
Yeah.
So kindness is important. And sometimes kindness means accepting that you're feeling rotten or miserable. It doesn't mean transcending. Kindness could mean welcoming whatever you feel, and often does mean that. So it's not skipping over when it doesn't feel good. It's not trying to have gratitude, for instance, for things when you're feeling just sad.
Right.
So it's actually being kind for wherever you are. And kindness sometimes means allowing yourself to be exactly where you are. And then it could help to get support, because so often we move into judgment without realizing we have. And so that's an antidote to judgment, is what's the kindest thing, or getting support from somebody else. Having a good friend, a buddy. In our retreats, we divide up into buddies or partners so that there's always somebody to call. Support is such an important part of all of this.
So true. And I was thinking that when we were just talking about those berating thoughts too, getting a reality check from someone who loves us and knows we're not the shithead that we're saying that we are.
Right.
Getting that perspective is super important.
Yes.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So I want to just refer to something in your most recent book. And you talk about, you say, I'm just going to quote it here. It says, if you ask a group of people who want to lose weight whether they'd find being thinner threatening, you would hear a unanimous no. But you would be asking adults, and that which wants to stay hidden is young. The proof is not in what people say they want, but in what they do. not in their wishes, but in their actions, which consistently lead to the spectacularly dismal results of maintaining weight loss. And while it is the adult who decides to limit her food or eat the paleo diet or substitute good fats for trans fats, it's the ghost children, capitalized G and C, the ghost children, the ones that hid in the closet when our parents were fighting, or whose breasts our uncles fondled, or whose mother died when we were 10, who sabotaged the results. If even just a part of us is constellated around a painful story from the past, if we haven't named or allowed the feelings that accompany that story their due, then losing weight is like telling a small child that everything on which her survival depends has been ripped away. Not exactly a recipe for success. I just love that, Geneen. That's just so beautiful. Can we talk about that a little bit, about that self-sabotage and that young person in us that is really running the show, even though we think she's not?
Well, a couple of things I want to say about that. One is that I call it undigested or frozen part of ourselves, which is usually frozen in the past from a particular situation or into a pattern from situations that happened many times as we were growing up. And that part is frozen only because we haven't actually welcomed it or allowed that part to be cherished. It freezes when we've exiled it. It freezes when we don't want to hear from it. We're afraid to hear from it because we're afraid it's going to be overwhelming. But the thing is that it only becomes overwhelming the more it's pushed away. If you have an image of a little sand, for instance, you're on the beach and you have a teeny little pile of sand, just a little pile of sand, and you take a instrument and you push and you push and you push on that sand. It becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you have a big mountain of sand because you've exerted so much force against it. And that's what happens with these parts of ourselves. We don't want to hear from them. We want to get rid of them. We feel like they're going to be overwhelming. We ignore them. We just don't want to hear.
Now, annihilate them with food.
Yes, we eat. Right. Here, take this, which is what many of us were given when we were sad or lonely. Here, have an ice cream. Here, have some cookies. So food was a soother, and then we use it to soothe ourselves. It doesn't really work because after you eat, what was going on before you ate is still going on, but now you've eaten and now you have whatever recriminations you have about having eaten. So you've doubled the pain, not lessened it. In terms of that, what we'll often find is that the part of us that eats has a good reason for eating. And that's why we need to listen to it. And what I would recommend is doing a written dialogue with that part of ourselves and asking, what's going on? When you eat, what is it you want? And again, having that be a whole separate part. Gestalt therapy, which was a kind of therapy that was very popular in the 60s and 70s, would have people sit in separate chairs and one part talk to the other part. We all have lots of different parts of ourselves. And to actually listen to that part that eats and say, what is it you're trying to tell me that I'm not hearing? And you're using food to get my attention with. And for instance, with myself, I tried that at the very beginning, and I realized that I was eating and eating and eating because every time I was thinner, I'd throw myself at unavailable men who didn't really want me. And when I had gained 40, 50, 60 pounds, I felt so unattractive that I didn't do that, and I could focus on my work, which is what I wanted. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of the parts of us that we have buried with food, Is that the same recipe you would recommend for bringing those parts to light so they can be healed?
One at a time, slowly, with compassion and support. Yes.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. It's don't go to those dark places alone. Yeah. Beautiful. And in terms of, it's just one other thing I think would be really cool to talk about, and that is meditation, because I know you have some thoughts about that.
What I think about meditation is that it's very important for all of us to have a contemplation time of the day, a quiet time in which we're not identified with the doer, but that we get to sink back into our bodies, our breath, and being the beer instead of the doer. The being part of the human being. There's human and then there's being. And being doesn't have goals. And being is a kind of freedom and a vastness inside of us. And everybody's got it. We couldn't think without having a lot of space through which the thoughts go, like the sky has clouds in it, like thunderstorms happen in an open sky. There's weather comes and it goes, thoughts come and go, and something remains. It is very helpful to start knowing yourself as that which remains rather than that which constantly passes through. It's frustrating and anxiety producing to identify or engage with every single thought that comes in. Because in 15 minutes or in 2 days, what we thought was so important one day is not going to be important at all. Or a year from now, this big situation that's going on is not going to be important at all. I remember with my second book, I was away at a retreat center, and I found out that they hadn't published another round, a second printing. And I was all up, my knickers were in a twist, and I was really upset, and I was, and there was somebody sitting at the table with me, a man who was in his 60s. I was in my 30s then. And he said, take it from this old gray head. What you think is so important right now isn't. In a year from now, it won't be important at all. And he was right. But we don't realize that. Our cortisol rises, our anxiety rises. We just get contracted and anxious about things we think are so urgent that really aren't. So what meditation or contemplation does is help us get back in touch with what's really important. So I would recommend people start doing that even for 5 minutes a day. Sit down, breathe, become aware of your breath. 5 minutes, just start. Or start noticing the goodness in your life. I would say ask yourself every day, a couple of times a day, what's not wrong right now?
I love that.
Right now. That gives you a much bigger perspective than what your mind is going around and around about. Brain scientists have discovered that most of our thoughts, 95 to 98% of them, are repetitive. We hardly have any new thoughts. And when you ask yourself what's not wrong, you break out of the pattern. And there are so many things in this moment. If people listening to us would ask themselves what's not wrong right now, they would come up with 15, 20 things. The very least of which would be, I have a body. I'm alive. I'm on this side of the ground, not the other side of the ground. I'm breathing. There's the smell of flowers. I have this friend. I have a dog who wags her tail. I have enough to eat for those of us who do. There's a teeming abundance, an infusion of goodness in each of our lives that we hardly ever pay attention to. And that question would help. And that's a contemplation practice too.
I love that. What's not wrong right now? I just love that. I'm going to take that with me, Geneen. That's beautiful. Very beautiful. And I've been meditating for 30 years, and I'm absolutely, like, I couldn't live without it. It's like air and sunshine for me. So I love what you shared about that. It's been super, super integral to my own healing journey. So beautiful to have you. Thank you so much for these wonderful words. And yeah, I have one last question for you that I always ask my guests, this being the Heal Your Hunger show. And that is, what is your deepest hunger?
My deepest hunger is to, on an ongoing basis, be aware of being the vastness, rather than getting identified and engaged with my passing thoughts. So just to continue to do that more and more.
Beautiful. Amen to that. That's just so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and thank you for your amazing work and contribution to healing the planet of their disordered eating. It's disordered eating amongst everybody, I think, who is touched by it in some way or another. So thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Lovely to be with you, Tricia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.